We'll do that. So we are now recording. And if you want to drop any questions you might have into the chat, I think Garrett will take a look at the questions and may stop the speaker to answer those questions, or otherwise we'll just keep going. But Todd Scott is the executive director of the Detroit Greenways Coalition, which is leading advocacy efforts to create a citywide network of safe, convenient, and green non-motorized pathways across the city of Detroit. Scott began working with the Detroit Greenways Coalition in 2008 through the Michigan Trails and Greenways Alliance. And since, he has helped make Detroit a national leader in greenways and bike lane development. Scott also helped guide the early development of the Joe Louis Greenway and secure a bike hike path on the Gordie Howe International Bridge. So without further ado, Mr. Todd Scott.
Is that working okay?
Yep, just fine.
Great. Okay, so thank you so much for having me on tonight. And I will give you one warning that this is the first time I've given this presentation. I updated it today, so there's some new slides for me. So if I'm a little rusty or whatever, please forgive me. People often wonder, how are we actually building, or what are we actually doing? And this is our vision, as you mentioned, Jerry. How do we connect up the entire city of Detroit with non-motorized connections for walking, biking, rolling, and so on? And this is our vision for the city of Detroit. And people think this might be kind of a difficult proposition since we are the motor city. And some people have a very, perhaps an inaccurate view of the history of Detroit. We were founded by Cadillac, but they didn't arrive in a Cadillac car. I think some people might think that's how Detroit might have been founded, that we've always been the motor city. But we were actually founded by Cadillac, who arrived on a canoe in 1701. And when he arrived here, Native Americans had already developed a statewide network of trails, non-motorized trails, that were carbon neutral. And so we have a long history of trails in Detroit, as well as the Underground Railroad. We were a major stop as those who were escaping slavery came up to Detroit, either to settle here or to continue on to Canada. So we have a strong heritage in trails that people often overlook. And in 1868, the first bicycle was ridden on the streets of Detroit. In 1898, Detroit was considered one of the best biking cities in the United States, perhaps with the exception of Brooklyn. This is the first or second movie ever made in the city of Detroit. This shows people leaving work from Park Davis down on the riverfront. And I think there was about 1,000 people leaving work, 400 were on bike, 600 were walking. Kind of an amazing video, amazing movie. And this is from the Library of Congress. But you can see people aren't wearing Lycra. They're not going really fast. Some are smoking cigars. It's a really social, casual. This is transportation. So one of the issues with in Michigan, and especially in Detroit, was that many of the roads were not in good condition for biking. They were made of wood. They were unpaved. It wasn't a major deal for other modes of transportation because people could take the urban railroad, or they were walking, or they had horses. And so having good roads wasn't a necessity. So bicyclists, starting with Edward Hines, led efforts to build good roads in Michigan. That includes first concrete highway built. First mile of concrete highway built in the world. Another bicyclist from Detroit founded MDOT in order to get better roads for bicyclists. And once the roads were improved, this really opened the door for motor vehicles and the auto industry in many ways to kind of take over these roads. There's still, you can see maybe I hope you can still see my arrow. There is a bicyclist on the road and there's a pedestrian trying to cross the road, but the streets became dominated by cars and streetcars, and of course later the streetcars became buses. So when the Detroit Greenways Coalition began, there weren't many non-motorized pathways in the city of Detroit. The roads were largely built for cars only. There were some bike lanes on Belle Isle. There were some trails at some of the parks. There's a little bit of Detroit riverfront built down by the Joe Louis Arena. But where we are today, we're starting to see a much bigger network of biking infrastructure. Now, the caveat with this is that some of this infrastructure is merely just signed routes. Some are bike lanes that aren't well maintained. They aren't, separated from traffic as well as they could be. The lines with the dots are protected bike lanes, but sometimes we still have cars parking in them. They're not well maintained. So, the state of Detroit bike infrastructure is ever changing, and we're constantly evolving and moving forward to better and better designs to address these issues. Sometimes it's important just to get out there and claim your space on the road first, and then find the funding to go back and make improvements to those pathways. We've been able to achieve a lot of this through what's called complete streets, which is designing streets for all road users. And we can do this through what's called road diets. So the photo on the top is one half of Woodward at Palmer Park, and it is 10 lanes wide. It is ridiculous. There's no need for that many lanes of traffic. I mean, that's more than I-75 has, right? There's just far fewer cars on this section of road. So opportunities like this present themselves, and we can take away some car lanes. We can add dedicated parking. We can add bike lanes. That photo in the lower right is Michigan Avenue, which is a big battle to get the first bike lanes on a state trunk line in Michigan. And trust me, there was a lot of fighting going on, and we had to take that issue all the way to Lansing to get that to happen. But it is an opportunity with Detroit's wide roads to open them up to more users. The next step has been moving to protected bike lanes. These are the bike lanes on Cass Avenue. Unfortunately, they don't look as clean and as beautiful as they do in these photos. They need to be updated, but this was a major push from the city to get these put in. And now these have become kind of the standard for all projects in the city. One reason we've been successful in advocating for these is that we've taken a data-driven approach, and Mayor Duggan is very much into data. He doesn't want to hear the emotional arguments of why these bike lanes are beneficial or why they're killing the city of Detroit. He wants to see the data. And so in this example I'm showing here, bike lanes got put in on Jefferson. We have some bike counters. I installed them in the bike lanes, both on the far east side and also near Belle Isle. And we counted 154 bikes per day, just weeks after the bike lanes were installed. And closer to Belle Isle, we counted 373 bikes per day. So we gave this information to the mayor, and it's showing that people are using that. If you build it, they will use it. And it also shows that, when people like Keith Crane from Crane's Detroit publishes an op-ed that says no one's using the bike lanes, the mayor can say, you're wrong. And these are actually the numbers that we're seeing. And so that would really help state the case for these bike lanes. The city's also collecting vehicle delays too. They have cameras on some of their traffic lights so they can see how much cars are delayed, and it's been insignificant. But people's perception, motorist perception is that, it's causing a major issue. The underlying issue is that for 100 years they've had their way, and now they're not, and they're unable to speed as much when the lanes are taken away like this, and it causes them to be frustrated. But the data shows that this is actually a benefit. So the city of Detroit had a lot of funding available for road projects, and they did a series of streetscapes around the city. Perhaps the one that was most successful was Livernois, Avenue of Fashion between 7 Mile and 8 Mile. This is how it looked before, and this is pre-COVID. So you can imagine, you see how narrow those sidewalks are. I mean, that is not a sidewalk you want to be on during the pandemic. and there's no opportunity for outdoor sales or for outdoor cafes. Besides, the average speed on the street was 40 miles per hour. The speed limit was only 30. And there were cars that were going substantially higher, 60 and 70 miles per hour. It's just not a street where you would want to hang out on. So with the streetscape project, the road was substantially narrowed. The sidewalks were widened so businesses could expand a bit, have more of an outdoor presence. We had bike lanes at sidewalk level, which actually, although there was more conflicts perhaps with pedestrians, it reduced the need for maintenance. Road debris did no longer collected in the bike lanes on this design. Also had MoGo public bike share expanded into this area, and as well as some of the southeast Oakland County communities, which you can kind of think of as transit for the first and last mile for public transit. It's, you know, you can get off the bus and you can grab one of these bikes and get to your final destination. But it's been so beneficial to have MoGo expanding in these areas and offering reduced rates for those who are on state assistance. That really helps make it easier for everyone in Detroit to get a bike. The Live Right project also has a number of green stormwater features where water comes off the road, is naturally filtered through vegetation, and if in case of substantial rain downfall, the water will go into the sewage system, but otherwise for lighter rain, it just gets collected in these green stormwater features. Another streetscape project is Kercheval over on the east side. This is actually a two-way cycle track, which was unique to the city at the time. Seems to be well received, and folks do tend to like this. It has what's called a floating bus stop. So the bus stop is actually moved closer to the street where the buses would be, so buses don't have to pull into the bike lanes. And this is a design that actually it seems like a lot of people really like this design. Also, maybe there's less debris, or at least there's more opportunity for bicycles to go around debris if it's at the curb. West McNichols has a similar design. It did pilot these new green delineators, which are plastic and are not looking as nice as they are in this photo. But this is unfortunately, this is a very short segment of streetscape, and it's just not connected to anything else yet. So that's something that needs to happen. Yeah, without being connected to other things, you don't have as much ridership as you'd like. Another streetscape was on Bagley in Mexican Town, as well as Riopel in Eastern Market. This is kind of a new design. It's a curbless design. You'll notice there's no curbs at all. Cars are expected to go very slow, and there's plenty of space for outdoor activities. It makes it easier to close the street to have festivals. And so this is a new design that it doesn't fit everywhere, but it does in some locations such as this. City of Detroit also spent some of their road bond money to enhance MDOT's project on Grand River. This was a road diet that went from 7 lanes to 5 with a two-way cycle track. It did lose some parking, so it was a little bit controversial, but they lost parking on the side of the street where it wasn't needed as much. But there's still issues with cars parking in the bike lane, and it's been difficult to get that to stop happening. Another streetscape that is still under construction is Rosa Parks. There used to be, I think it was 5 or 6 lanes one way going northbound. It was substantially more lanes than the Lodge Expressway, which was ridiculous. So Detroit has, reduced those lanes, removed pavement, which is a great way to reduce stormwater runoff, and added that space that used to be car lanes, added it to the nearby park to expand the park, and added a pathway for bicyclists to travel through the park and connect up with the new bike lanes on the north side. East Warren streetscape is also getting enhanced protected bike lanes. This is a picture from last year. It's further along than this now. And this is the Dexter streetscape, which I'm not sure if this will start construction this year. I believe it'll start construction this year, but I don't think the contracts have gone before City Council yet. I should mention too, one reason, the mayor of Detroit doesn't bike. But but he's really a strong believer in these streetscape designs. And one reason why is the former transportation commissioner for New York City, Jeanette Sedekhan, was once giving a presentation to the mayor. She was part of Bloomberg Associates, gave a presentation on her work in New York City with adding these protected bike lanes and road diets and so on. And immediately into her presentation, the mayor stopped her and said, "I was just in New York City. I walk out of my hotel. You took away a lane of traffic to add bike lanes and the cars were backed up. Why did you do that?" And she was able to present the data. She said, "Well, actually the cars are moving a little bit better than they were before. We have all these bicyclists using it." She gave numbers on the number of bicyclists on the bike lane. And all the businesses along these streets are doing much better than the streets that don't have bike lanes and complete street designs. And that really is what helped sell the mayor on this whole concept moving forward. So I want to talk a little bit about, what's going on in the near future here. The city of Detroit completed a new transportation plan that looks at all modes of transportation, not just cars. And this transportation was just recently released. They also did a street design guide as part of this that says, if you have this type of street, this is how your street should look in the future. And this is an example in this illustration here. This is a downtown street. And so the expectation is that your downtown street should look similar to what was done on Livernois. And then this is a residential street. I know you've probably heard about Detroit installing speed humps to slow speeding of cars, but this is another approach to reduce speeding as well, is to narrow the street and add bump outs and chicanes, because you're not going to go super fast on a street like this. And that just increases the safety for everyone. And a third part of the transportation plan was to develop a comprehensive safety plan. Detroit has a very high crash rate. We lose over 100 people per year in vehicle crashes. That includes over 40 pedestrians per year. Not too many bicyclists, fortunately. But those crashes aren't distributed evenly across the city of Detroit. They tend to occur on certain roads. And so the city analyzed all the roads and where the crashes are occurring, and then set out the target improvements to those roads that have the most crashes. It's called the high injury network. And so with this completed, they were able to apply for a federal grant to help build out these projects. And they received nearly $25 million from U.S. Department of Transportation to build out these projects. Some are really quick, just paint and post, but some are much more substantial changes that involve moving curbs and so on. So excited to see these happening in the next couple of years. Another project.
Todd,
yeah.
Todd, real quick, is it okay if I jump in with a question that was in the chat, or would you like us to save those to the end?
Nope. Go ahead.
This one in particular was just about something you just referenced. So I didn't want to lose the context, but Sherry had asked about, she had just commented that she hears a lot of complaints about speed humps collecting rainwater and debris. And so she's asking if I think what you referenced in that previous picture of like the residential street that was pretty narrow and it didn't really have the speed humps, but it was a different way of sort of slowing people down, if that kind of avoided those problems.
It could, yeah, because I think anytime you do a project like this, you're gonna be doing some regrading, so you can solve all your water flow issues. But when the city goes in and puts speed humps in, they're not looking at the grade of the road and making any corrections. And so this kind of a project would address that. But I think the speed humps typically don't run all the way to the curbs. There's two types of speed humps. There's the speed cushions, which shouldn't affect stormwater at all. Those are just like 3 pads that they install on the road. And the speed cushions are asphalt that run almost all the way across the road, but they don't quite get to the curb. So it shouldn't affect stormwater. But I've seen a lot of road designs where the grade of the road is incorrect. And that is a big issue.
Thanks, Todd.
Sure. So talking about some other projects that are occurring that are interesting, related to non-motorized. One is the replacement of I-375 The bridges along I-375 are near the end of their lifespan, so MDOT had to do something. They could rebuild everything as is, or they could imagine it as a at-grade boulevard, which is what they pursued. So I-375 will no longer be an interstate freeway. It'll be at grade. You know, it's still going to be wide. It's still designed to carry a lot of traffic, unfortunately. But there are some positives to it. It's hard to see on this map here, but that blue line is new bike lanes. So there will be a bike lane that now connects Ford Field to Eastern Market being up here. And also a bike lane that connects from this street down to the Riverwalk. So that's super exciting. That's a really important connections that don't currently exist. You know, we do have concerns about people getting across this new boulevard, which can get pretty wide, especially up near Gratiot. It's quite wide. It gets much narrower the further south you go, but we're really concerned about how pedestrians and bikes can get across this safely, and that's something we're continuing to work on with the city of Detroit and the Michigan Department of Transportation. But this could be a good project. We're just making sure it's as good as it can be. And construction for this begins in 2027. The MDOT received a substantial grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation. One other big issue that we're working on, which is affecting Detroiters, is pedestrian bridges. MDOT has done a very poor job maintaining their pedestrian bridges over their freeways, and they don't maintain them, and then they become blighted and decay, and then MDOT closes them, and in many cases quietly just removes them to save money. So they've done this quite a bit in the past, and we've been stepping up lately to prevent this from happening any further. One thing that happened last year that really brought this to the limelight was a pedestrian was walking across a bridge over the lodge and actually fell through the bridge. The bridge opened up underneath him and he fell. Fortunately, it was not over the car traffic underneath the bridge. It was on the grassy embankment, and he was not hurt too badly. But suddenly that caused a lot of issues. MDOT realized they needed to start inspecting their pedestrian bridges more often. As a result, they've closed, I think 3 more bridges, and they don't have plans to replace them. And so this is just a major issue that we're taking up. I mean, you can't expect people to walk miles out of their way to get across these freeways, which are major barriers. So this is something to stay tuned on. We should have more information, you know, moving forward. But unfortunately, USDOT does not hold MDOT's feet to the fire on maintaining these bridges, and that's something we're trying to change as well. We'll see what happens. Some other projects that are coming in the near future. Michigan Avenue has a brand new design that is more like Livernois. That will go from 96 to downtown. Includes transit only lane, which is pretty exciting. 14th Street in Corktown is going to get some changes, along with some parts of Rosa Parks, which is 12th Street. MDOT's looking at Gratiot Avenue, how to make safety improvements. Gratiot Avenue is probably the most dangerous street in the state of Michigan. I calculated that 1.5% of all the road fatalities in the state of Michigan occur on Gratiot Avenue in the city of Detroit. It is a major speedway, and we need MDOT to actually design that so that cars don't speed. East Jefferson, city is waiting on the word whether they'll get substantial federal funding to rebuild all of Jefferson. I don't know the current design, but it'll likely be raised bike lanes, either similar to Kirchhoff or Livernois. Gordie Howe, I'll talk about later, is getting a bike and pedestrian trail along the bridge to Canada, but also all the roads around the U.S. Bridge Plaza are going to have biking and walking features added by the time the bridge opens in 2024, 2025. And then West Jefferson and Rosa Parks, if you're familiar with that area behind the post office, a 2-way cycle track will be going in there soon. And that bend in Rosa Parks in West Jefferson will go away. It'll become a normal 90-degree intersection. And that's all part of the work for the new park that's going in there, the Ralph C. Wilson Centennial Park, as well as the Southwest Greenway. So let's talk about greenways. There's a lot going on here too. But, you know, a little going back in time, for those who aren't aware, you know, Detroit's riverfront was an industrial riverfront. It was blighted, and the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy has done an amazing job converting this into, you know, the #1 riverfront in the United States. And the DeQuinter Cut was an abandoned rail corridor, and the residents along it said they were not going to go into that ditch, even if it was made into a beautiful trail. But once the trail was built, everyone loved it, including everyone who lived along it, and said, when are you going to make it longer? So the city of Detroit acquired additional land and extended the DeQuinter Cut all the way up to Eastern Market and up to Mack Avenue. I love this photo. This is the deputy director of DPW who didn't think that DeQuinter Cut was a good idea in the beginning. And here he is standing precariously on a bridge that is crumbling and telling what this is the MDOT person why we need funding to continue extending the DeQuinter Cut trail. Of course, this is what it looks like today. Highly successful project. And again, data driven. There are bike and pedestrian counters on the trail that are counting well over 1,000 users per day during the summer. And we saw this jump up significantly during COVID too. This was the use of the trails went through the roof during COVID, which justified getting more ARPA, American Rescue Plan dollars going towards trails such as the Joe Louis Greenway. And speaking of the Joe Louis Greenway, this is the 27-mile trail that we've been working on since 2008. This, you know, we used to be kind of the lead on this, working with the city, and now the city has totally taken this over. And they are just going crazy. They are expanding the vision of what we thought was possible. You know, we originally thought it was just going to be an asphalt pathway around the city for biking and walking. And when Detroit hired Maurice Cox as its planning director, he expanded the vision to say, no, this should be a tool for redeveloping the neighborhoods, revitalizing retail strips, connecting all the investments we were making in the neighborhoods, and as well as being a great recreational amenity for Detroiters. So we walk around the loop here. The DeQuinter Cut, of course, is already done. Riverwalk is done. The Southwest Greenway just opened last week. So that is basically done. Bagley is done. I showed you the shared use street that is included here. There's some debate about how this route will go. It's still a little bit in limbo. But this section here along Jefferson will get built as part of the Gordie Howe Bridge, which will cross the Detroit River right here. There's some changes. This is an out-of-date map. Some changes are happening in this area here with some of the routing based upon community feedback. And then it comes up here in this section of phase 1. The lower half is almost completed. It will be completed this year. The pathway's in. There's just some landscaping to complete, and a new park that went in at Warren Avenue, a new play feature. The construction continues northward across Grand River, where there's a retail strip that'll get revitalized. The city is doing a lot of removal of blight. So this is being very well received by the community because while adding a bike lane, a bike path was not at the top of their priorities, removing blight, adding park space, improving retail, all that was at the top of their list. And so this greenway is absorbing all the priorities of the community and becoming much more than just a pathway for walking and biking. It continues north. This is an abandoned rail corridor that was owned by Conrail. This will get cleaned up this year, and I expect it to go under construction next year. This portion of Joseph Campo already has a two-way cycle track on it. Hamtramck is completing their section this year. they couldn't go right through downtown Hamtramck. It was too narrow, so there's going to be an alternative route for, less confident cyclists to go through the alleyway. And they're working with businesses to open up their access to the alleyway. So that's going to be kind of a really unique, fun feature. This section here is all on city-owned land. That should be under construction this year. And of course, an extension of the DeQuinter Cut along the rail corridor. This will be under construction soon as well. So the mayor wants this done by 2027. When we started it, it was a $35 million project. Now it's like a $350 million project or something like that. Or maybe it's $250 million. The city has almost all the money, but a Joe Louis Greenway Conservancy was created to take additional funding to create an endowment, and you can take the interest off that endowment to fund programming and maintenance of this going forward into the future. I would add too that we got bike lanes installed on Highland Park on Hamilton, and we're hoping, they haven't been well maintained by the city of Highland Park, but we're hoping that the Joe Louis Greenway will have funding to help maintain those going forward, because those bike lanes help connect up the entire city of Highland Park to the trail. So Gordie Howe Bridge, as I mentioned, is going to have a biking and walking path along its side. And Canada announced that there will be no toll for bicyclists going across between Detroit and Windsor, which is great. There's also plenty of trails on the other side, and so you can go wherever you want, out to Point Pelee or Amherstburg. It's gonna be pretty amazing. Already mentioned the Southwest Greenway that just opened. This is a former rail corridor between the Ford Central Station and the Riverwalk. There's a new section of Riverwalk in front of the Riverfront Apartments. I'm not sure when that will open. It'll be opening soon, but the Riverfront Conservancy is waiting for the next piece to open further downstream. And I'm not clear if that'll be opening this year or next year. Another greenway that got built recently is the Dennis Archer Greenway. This is actually following roughly where the Joseph Campo Street is, and this helps connect more people to the neighborhood. And there's a really great success story here between Larned and Jefferson. A bunch of businesses went in. So you can ride your bike to places like Breadless, and I think there's now a wine place there. There's the Red Hook Greenways. So there's a lot of businesses that are taking advantage of this. And also that whole area there has stormwater features, as does the Joe Louis Greenway. The East River Walk is expected to open up this year. That will connect Mount Elliott Park to Gabriel Richard Park and the MacArthur Bridge to Belle Isle. Super exciting. Folks have been waiting on this for a long, long time. There's a new trail that is being built around the perimeter of Belle Isle, and that goes roughly between the road and the water. Portions built from the bridge to the yacht club. There's a gap, and it continues on to the Iron Bell trailhead. That should go. The rest of it should be under construction end of this year and completed next year. Then I mentioned briefly, there are plans to build a greenway using the existing infrastructure from Lake Huron all the way to Lake Erie. And this is being led by the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, but this is like a long-term plan for connecting up that entire region. I want to talk briefly about people, because I talked a lot about infrastructure. I think, we focus so much on concrete and paint and that, but it's the people that are most important. And one thing that's been amazing through this whole process is the emergence of the bike culture in Detroit. There are about 80 bike clubs in Detroit. Not all are active, but we have more bike clubs than any other city in the United States. And they're leading multiple rides every night of the week. So this really, I think in the beginning, there were a lot of questions of who are you building these bike lanes for, with the presumption that these are being built for white new Detroiters, but the reality is that those riding on the city streets are longtime African-American Detroiters for the most part. And the demographics vary. This is more of a typical group of helmet wearing, lycra-wearing cyclist from Greater Grace Church. And then this is the more sassy Detroit chain gang bike squad. This is the concrete lane bangers. And when these groups ride through the neighborhoods, through residential streets, people see folks that look like themselves riding easy and slow, and they're encouraged to come out and join the group and ride. And that's what really has helped encourage more people to take up biking in Detroit. It also helps that they have very cool bikes, custom bikes that that take advantage of the fact that cities are very flat cities, so you don't have to bike up any hills. And so these bikes are much more usable then. They often have very complex light systems, which started as a result of Detroit streetlights being out. The people wanted their bikes to be seen, so they're not getting hit by cars. But that's involved more into an art form. And we had a lot of people riding on trikes. This is my friend Kawani, who's got a terrarium on the back of her trike with her iguana. Her iguana is in there, and she can go take the iguana for a bike ride. But yeah, it's just an amazing, great scene, just riding through Detroit, encouraging more people to ride through Detroit. And it's leading to some very positive health outcomes. Folks are losing weight. People are dealing with other health issues, heart issues, diabetes, and depression and PTSD. So, you know, it's more than just riding to get places. It's more about recreation. It's more about building a healthier Detroit. You know, there's studies that show that people who participate in active transportation were less susceptible to COVID, bad COVID outcomes, and also helped improve vaccine outcomes as well. So there's just a lot of positives to getting more people biking in terms of health and also the health of our planet. So this is, I mean, some might see this as a big pivot for us getting into climate change, but it really isn't. We really see this as an opportunity to get more funding and more done for getting people biking and walking and other green modes of transportation, as well as dealing with stormwater runoff and reducing urban heat islands. In fact, this is the plan for the Joe Louis Greenway. Green infrastructure is a key to this entire project, and they've identified how along the route different types of infrastructure could be added to absorb stormwater, reduce stormwater runoff, even take on green stormwater from adjacent properties as well. And this was very well received from the community. And of course, Sierra Club, Irma Leapart was a big part of this as well. I mean, she was always pushing for, you know, green stormwater management. And so I'm glad to say it was a big part of this Greenway project. And we really need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Transportation is now, you know, the largest sector for greenhouse gas emissions. And if you see in this this ranking, this shows greenhouse or carbon emissions per gram per kilometer traveled. And of course, by foot, there's zero carbon emissions. By bike, there are carbon emissions, largely due to the manufacture of the bicycle. And some of the infrastructure. I mean, you have to have a road and so on. That has associated carbon emissions. But as you move further down the list, you have e-bikes at 18. Diesel buses are, you know, 33 to 38 grams per kilometer. And you have to come all the way down here. You see electric cars are 99. And that's largely due to the manufacturer of the vehicle. I'm not sure what it is for electric SUVs, which are probably significantly more. And then down here at the bottom, you have these are gas and diesel cars. So you can see that even if we electrify all the vehicles, we're not reducing the emissions to where we can get carbon neutral. We really need to emphasize these modes here to get carbon neutrality. And I should say too, you know, vehicles have emissions from their tailpipes, which have been drastically reduced through regulations, but there's a lot of other emissions that aren't accounted for. Infrastructure, creating the concrete, There are emissions due to heat islands, stormwater runoff, particulate matter, which is a major source of PM 2.5 emissions. When your tires wear out, that tire wear ends up in the street as road dust, and as vehicles ride by, that road dust gets put into the air. Is a major source of major cause for asthma. So with EVs, expect increased tire wear and increased PM 2.5 emissions due to electric vehicles. And as mentioned, vehicle manufacturing, sprawl, and also parking your vehicle all have environmental costs associated with them. So what we really need to do is we really need to reduce our vehicle miles traveled by shifting people to different modes that are more green. This photo is from the city of Seattle. This year we had 30 of us went to Seattle, including a lot of folks from city of Detroit, city council, and we met with Seattle to talk about what they're doing. And they're really pushing this. They're trying to get people out of single occupancy vehicles and into EVs, public transit, biking, and walking, because they really see that that's the approach you need to take to get to carbon neutrality. We really need to invest more in transit so people don't have to take cars. You can get places by rail much easier. Not just across the state, but also within the city of Detroit. I mean, our transit is not what it needs to be. We need to make improvements to biking and walking, as shown in this photo from Copenhagen. People aren't just going to start biking and walking if they don't feel they have good infrastructure, especially if it's not safe. And we also need to incentivize biking and walking and e-bikes. E-bikes are a great opportunity to get more people using bikes as transportation because it doesn't require the level of fitness. You can get places without sweating. You can travel longer distances faster, and you can use existing infrastructure, and we don't need any changes to current laws. It is ideal. I know Sierra Club has came out in strong support of getting more people on e-bikes. And so we've made the case to the governor that you can't incentivize electric vehicles and not incentivize non-motorized vehicles like e-bikes when they generate significantly fewer carbon emissions. And also, there's also an equity issue. Folks in Detroit, a large percentage of folks in Detroit are not going to be able to spend $40,000 on an EV. If you give them incentives to purchase an EV, that's not going to solve the insurance issue. The high cost of insurance prevents a lot of Detroiters from driving legally in Detroit. So we need more solutions like increased transit, and we need to incentivize e-bikes. One thing we really need to do too is better land use planning. If everything's spread out and continues to spread out, people are going to drive more and more. So we need to build things closer to one another so people can walk and bike and use transit easier. So states like Colorado are doing what's called greenhouse gas budgeting. So their road agencies can't just build new roads or widen new roads, which induces more travel without making other investments that reduce driving elsewhere. So this is something we tried to get into the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan, but MDOT refused to allow it. I mentioned too that, one of the issues, if you don't tackle land use policy, even though you're reducing emissions, people are going to drive more, and that will eliminate all the benefits you got from reducing the emissions. And every time you widen roads, you increase vehicle miles traveled by the same proportion. A 10%, one study found that a 10% increase in lane miles results in a 10% increase in driving. So it's just not a solution. Unfortunately, this administration does not understand that. They are unwilling to change MDOT. The lieutenant governor told me that changing MDOT is a very difficult task, and I said, yes, they work for you, so start. But they're unwilling so far to change MDOT, and MDOT loves increasing vehicle miles traveled because that increases gas tax funding to them. I use this photo because I found it very ironic that the governor is here to talk about climate change and how the freeways are flooding. Doesn't understand that MDOT has plans to widen this road and increase impervious surface and increase stormwater runoff. So there's a strong disconnect between what we need to do. You know, it's fixing the damn roads needs to be more than just filling potholes. You know, we need to look at doing road diets, doing stormwater management, shifting people to safer, greener modes of transportation like biking, walking, and transit. But unfortunately, at this point, you know, it's hard to get this administration to change because, you know, they're embracing what they've done for the last 100 years and embracing what's good for the auto industry, and that might not be what's good for the planet. So that's my last slide. Sorry to end on a downer, but I'm sure there's some questions for me.
Well, you know, Todd, you actually hit that question about, have you seen changes with the new administration? And I thought I would see some changes like in, you know, construction where they're hauling away all the topsoil and unnecessarily hauling it away. And so that's terrible. You make me feel like I'm waiting for something that's not going to come. Do you see any fix to changing this attitude? Is there a way to enlighten?
I feel it is so this issue is so entrenched that it's going to take a major environmental climate-related catastrophe to change. And I think that's why we're seeing so much change in Seattle when we visited, because they're experiencing forest fires that are causing major smoke to come across their city and shut down operations. They're seeing sea level rise, you know, and we're kind of insulated from a lot of that being around the Great Lakes. And so I think there's less, you know, there's been less reason to change. And I think in many ways, since, you know, we are the automotive capital, we're kind of like expecting Michigan to lead on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation is kind of like expecting Kentucky or the tobacco industry to lead on reducing smoking. It's not going to happen because people are making a lot of money on it. And so I think it's really going to take, unfortunately, a major catastrophe or a major push from the federal level to get change to happen in Michigan. I will say that USDOT did propose rules to limit greenhouse gas emissions by states. The state of Michigan submitted comments opposing that, which the governor's office did not know they did, which is, you know, ridiculous. But so the federal government are trying to make some changes to rein in greenhouse gas emissions.
Mm-hmm. Folks, you can unmute and ask your questions.
If I can, just as people are maybe thinking about unmuting or jumping in with their questions, I want to I'm going to go back to the beginning and just call out some from the chat. Before I forget though, Todd, Sherry was saying she really liked the captioning, and I agreed with her. What is the program that you use to do that?
Could you repeat that again?
The captioning is excellent in the your presentation. The closed captioning, the text. Like, how do you do that? I
think that's just PowerPoint. That's just PowerPoint doing that.
Okay, there we go, Sherry.
Nobody else has discovered it. The only goof it had, the major goof it had, was it couldn't do dequinder cut, but it just doesn't know French. But no, I've seen some pretty poor captioning, and this was the best I've seen.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Todd, Craig Wood had just put in the chat, just saying hello from Livingston County. And he was here to sort of like learn and listen. And he dropped a question a little bit later. And his question was, have you been able to lower the speed limits on city streets? He shared that we have been told that the speed limits may go up if an analysis is completed, narrowing lower speeds for sure.
Well, I mean, I could do a whole presentation on speed limits, the history of speed limits. So speed limits are set two different ways. One is called statutory, which means you don't have to do any study, you can just set it. And that is for like residential streets, business districts. You know, for residential streets, you can set it at, it's by default 25, and you don't have to study it or anything. You don't even have to put up a sign. It's by default. However, on a lot of streets, there's no statutory speed limit. And so what they do is they do a speed study and they look at the 85th fastest motorist, and there's an assumption that that motorist is the smart motorist that's driving the safe speed. And so they set the speed limit to the nearest 5-mile-an-hour increment of that 85th fastest motorist. They don't necessarily take into account whether there are bikes and peds, road conditions. They don't take into account whether there's schools or parks nearby. Extremely frustrating. I believe the state law currently does allow more flexibility, but road engineers refuse to do that. So we are working on legislation that could make it a little more clear that road engineers can use judgment to change the speed limit from the 85th fastest percentile. And by the way, that 85th, where did the 85 come from? It comes from a 1950s study of cars traveling on rural two-way roads, which has no application for most of the roads around here. But it's very easy to do. So the police love it. They just have to count cars, and then they see how fast they're all going, and then just take the 85th fastest one. I will say one more thing too. Speed limits, changing speed limits can reduce speeds a little bit, but the best way to do it is by changing your road design. I didn't mention that when Livernois was completed, I said before the average speed was 40 and cars were going, 50 and 60 miles per hour. After the completion of the road diet, the average speed was 30 miles an hour, the speed limit. And so there's still some cars going super fast. So, we would like to see the ability in Michigan to have automated speed enforcement for the reckless drivers. But for the most part, there's less need for law enforcement, which comes with a whole lot of other issues, especially in Black and brown communities. If you just design the streets so that it's intuitive to go the speed limit.
Great. Thank you, Todd. Appreciate that very much.
And on Livernois, the parking meters are there. They don't work, right?
I didn't know. Okay, I know there's some controversy with the parking meters. They wanted a period of time where there were no parking meters, and so maybe we're still in that time period. There was some agreement that was struck between the city of Detroit and the Council 2 district. So I'm not sure what the status is of that, but the whole reason we have parking meters is not to collect money. That is not the reason to have parking meters. The reason we have parking meters is when you give away something for free, people take advantage of it and will use it all up. So parking meters are invented so that people wouldn't park their car all day long and have it sitting there for free. So you by charging a rate, becomes a natural turnover. And what that does is it opens up more parking spaces. So ideally, you set the parking rate, the fee at a certain rate so that there's always one free space open in every city block. So the advantage of charging for parking is that it's easier to find a parking space. But people turn that around and think it's just being done as a money grab, and that's not the case.
Interesting. So how many lanes is there going to be on 375? I had heard from another Sierra Club actually employee that it was ridiculous to take out the expressways. Basically, she said maybe like a expressway on at street level. And it's just how many lanes are there going to be?
It really varies. And there's also, I think a lot of people count all the turn lanes. Sometimes there's 2 turn lanes at an intersection and they'll count both turn lanes. But I think for the most part, at most, I think it's 8 when you get off the expressway, and I think it goes down to 3. It may go down to, I think it goes down to 2 eventually, and then goes down to, it may go down to, yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but it gets narrower and narrower as you go further down, especially when you get past Gratiot. North of Gratiot, I don't expect a lot of people to be crossing the street north of Gratiot, so having a lot of lanes there, it's not as big a deal as when you move further south. I'm really concerned about getting bikes and peds safely across at Lafayette and Jefferson. We did propose putting in a tunnel, an underpass for biking and walking, but there's some issues with limited space. So we're looking to see what other options we have for making it safer to make those crossings.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've hit 8 o'clock here, and
Jerry, if I could, there was I think there's one more question that was
Sure.
in there. And that was from Henry Noonan. He asked, he just said it'd be great to get planning and projects like this going in Warren. And I think a question to Todd is, what are some of the best resources for folks in Warren, or for basically just for them to be able to follow Detroit's suit?
Thank you, Garrett, because not only it's Warren, but all the suburbs.
So my recommendation is this. City of Warren should apply for a Safe Streets for All planning grant. I think the second, I'm not sure if the next round is opened up yet or not, but I can tell you, my insider tells me that there were not enough applications for the first round. They had money left over. So Warren, I think the city of Warren could easily get that grant funding. And with that funding, you can develop a safety plan that says, where are the streets in Warren where the most fatalities and injuries are occurring? And then the next round of Safe Streets for All, you apply for funding to build those out and make improvements to those streets. But I think that's really a great way of going about things, is applying for that funding. If you have a plan, getting money to implement the plan is so much easier.
Thank you so much.
And I can say too, I know a family, if you need an example, really sad story of a young man who rode his bike to work in Warren and was hit by a car and killed. That was last year, and extremely sad. I mean, it just, the family's asking how to make improvements, and he was riding along a 13-mile road, and it's just not a safe place to ride a bike. So yeah, Warren could really benefit from some improvements. It has some great retail strips, and people could walk and bike to those places if it were safer, and that that helps in return. That helps build local business. So
Thank you so much. Yeah, I live near two of the worst intersections for accidents and fatalities. So that's that would be a good reason for running for Warren City Council. And so, but I really want to make the cool cities get the Paris Accord that we were trying to bring to all the mayors in place.
sounds good.
Sherry dropped a question in and asking if there were still plans to widen I-94 through Macomb County. I don't know if anyone knows about that.
If they still are, we need to protest all over the place. I'm waiting to join one. Come on, Sierra Club.
Well, I can say that, groups across the country are getting better and better at fighting freeway expansions. And even I-94 in Detroit, the plan was to add service drives along both sides of I-94 for its entire length through Midtown and everything. And if it was approved by the federal government, it would have tore up a lot of parts of Detroit unnecessarily. And Maurice Cox, one of the first thing he did when he was the planning director, he and I and MDOT went on a bike tour of I-94 with MDOT. And one pivotal moment was we're standing, in Midtown, and MDOT goes, Maurice, I think you're going to be upset because we're going to turn this residential street into a service drive, and you're going to lose parking. And I go, no, Maurice, you're going to be upset because you now have a school with school children on a service drive. And oh, by the way, this recording studio behind me, every single Funkadelic album was recorded here, and that has to get torn down. And Maurice instantly goes, yeah, MDOT, I'm seeing something completely different here. He later said, although I'm not supposed to quote it, he did say, that shit ain't happening. And, with the mayor's support, they told MDOT, no, you're not doing this. And they forced MDOT to redo the plans for I-94. And although I-94 is still adding a lane within its existing footprint, there will be no new service drives added.
Yep. And that recording studio is, you can see it from I-94. It's the only building It's the last building that's standing on the side. And what street is that where that brand new bridge, very
Yeah, that's Second Avenue.
Second Avenue, right? And that's where that recording studio was. Yeah. Okay, any other questions for Todd?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a comment and a question. The comment has to do with the people that are using the lanes. Certainly it's important that the local Detroiters are using the bike lanes, but my experience at events, and I'm talking about the Tour Detroit or Tour Detroit, depending on what you prefer, and the slow roll is a diversity of people. There are Detroiters, there's suburbanites. Economically, at least to the best I could judge, there was every combination you could imagine. So I wanted to make sure people understood that. But the question I have is, I am a suburbanite and I have ridden my bike from Royal Oak to downtown Detroit, but it's not easy. Are there any plans to set up some kind of a recommended route, at least, to get from South Oakland County to downtown Detroit?
That's a great question. Yeah, because I make that commute myself. I got hit by a van last year on Woodward. But yeah, so there is a plan. MDOT has been ignoring it. And that plan was to add two-way bike lanes on both sides of Woodward, all the way up to Pontiac and all the way down to 8 Mile. Actually, all the way down to where the queue line is. But the problem was that plan was tied to the regional transit millage, and when that failed, there wasn't funding to implement the entire change to Woodward, and so MDOT's been ignoring it. However, Mayor Melanie Piana of Ferndale has successfully pushed MDOT to implement the section within their city. And Pleasant Ridge has too, a little bit as well, but that's under construction now and will be completed, I believe, end of this year. There will be at least a two-way cycle track on both sides of Woodward through the city of Ferndale. Then we're trying to get some improvements on Woodward south of there to connect at least down to Second Avenue. And if you're familiar with Second Avenue, it's a pretty comfortable ride from there down to Cass. But yeah, the plan is to make that connection from, I like to think from at least from the Royal Oak Zoo or the Detroit Zoo in Royal Oak to the Riverwalk.
Yeah, I think when people see the change and that it will be exciting for people to want to get extended, will it be protected then?
Through Ferndale, yes. There's 2 phases to it, but yeah, it will be protected bike lanes through city of Ferndale. And then I think in Detroit, we have opportunity to do something more since it's 10 lanes of road. Do something even better, maybe with some transit only lanes. And then make a connection over to Second Avenue. And Detroit has some plans to just trying to reduce the amount of cars that are using Second Avenue. So you could still have locals using it, but trying to reduce the cut through traffic by doing what's called a slow street, where you put at certain every so often on the intersections you put in diverters so cars can't continue straight, but bikes and peds can, which helps to keep cars off these roads and calms them down and makes it much more pleasant for people biking. You don't even necessarily need a bike lane or anything like that. It just becomes a much nicer place to ride a bike.
Gotcha.
Of course, once you get down to Highland Park, you could always jump on the Joe Louis Greenway and connect up to the Riverwalk and the DeQuinter Cut, or go the other way and connect up through Dearborn down to the Gordie Howe Bridge and go to Canada. So
Sounds good.
I think with e-bikes too, that makes this much more viable for folks. I'm a long distance cycler like Tom, not as much as Tom, but and so with e-bikes, this becomes much more realistic for a lot more folks.
Okay, well, we're at 8:11. Garrett?
Oh, I just was going to ask Jerry if you had any description. Lucy had asked about just availability for the presentation. We're recording it, but it's been a while since you and I have talked about the methods for sharing the presentations.
Well, we actually have been looking for a webmaster, and we thought we had one, and she did not was not familiar with Drupal, so we didn't get the webmaster, and that's why we're not getting them up. We're still looking for a webmaster, and if you have one, it's just too much. It's something that I don't do often enough that I have the time to try to figure out over and over again. But no, we've got Andrew Pola has put a few up on our YouTube channel, so we'll see if he can get this one up. I will make a specific effort to get this one up there, because really, I think it's very important information. So, yeah.
Well, thanks for that effort, Jerry, and thanks for the question, Lucy.
Okay, well, listen, I guess it was a great presentation, and we will see you all on the bike lanes and on your bike. So you all have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Hi,
Todd.
everybody. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bye-bye.